All right, everyone. Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Jason Levine, and thank you so much for joining me back on the stream this lovely Friday here in the desert for today's audio masterclass, which is going to focus on the concept of mastering. And what is mastering? And unless you're someone who does a lot of audio, you probably hear this term a lot. And if it's something that you're not doing, whether you're delivering video content to YouTube or any professional medium anywhere where people are consuming it, it's definitely something you should be doing and something you should be intimately aware of, because this is really what makes the difference between a mix or a final sound mix that kind of sounds, well, not quite done, not quite ready for delivery, versus one that really kind of grabs your attention and keeps you watching and keeps you listening. So the concept today, I'm actually going to be working on a mix from a video, from a trailer, but the same concepts apply whether you're mastering audio for music, music only versus music for video. Now, of course, there's different ways of thinking about how you present loudness in terms of like a trailer versus a mastered mix for a finished, complete film versus a track that you're mastering for Spotify. But again, conceptually, the ideas around mastering are all the same. So that's what we're going to cover today, and lots of detailed information, lots of cool little tips in here. And again, this is something which, if you're not already doing, you really should be doing. And I have an entire course on this, which you can watch on my YouTube channel, which is Jason Levine Video as well. I believe it's episode 10 of my Audio 101 series. But lots of stuff in there on mastering, and just, again, a lot of fundamentals. And these are a lot of common things that we've talked about on the stream before, based around equalization and compression and limiting and all that kind of stuff. So as always, we're coming to you live on YouTube, Behance, and Twitter Periscope. So thank you so much for joining. We've also got it running on my YouTube channel today. So real quickly, the Green Mind is here. Wade A. Cuff. Bob from Scottsdale, what's up? Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, always great to see you. Steve Kosaboom from New Zealand, always lovely. Lindsay Palmer, Sentil. Cal, how's it going? All right. Daniel, how are you? Davika, Alfred. All right. Bernadette, very nice to see you as well. Thank you so much. All right. And we've got Melissa, A2020, coming to us live. Tough Kid Gaming, what's up? All right. And Leonardo, how are you doing? Very nice to see you. Now, if you want to follow the conversation, that is actually happening over at behance.net/live. So I recommend you go over there. That is the chat that I'm going to be paying attention to. All right. So if you want me to respond in real time, that is where you want to be. All right. What's up, Everardo? Anthony, nice to see you. Okay. So real briefly, before we kind of jump into the application, what is mastering? Okay. Well, mastering is the concept of essentially finalizing that mix before you create that last final export that you deliver. And again, whether you're delivering it to YouTube or Vimeo or Twitter or Instagram or Netflix, doesn't matter, or broadcast television, mastering is the final step. So after you've done your mix, say in Premiere or wherever you are, you've tweaked your voices, you've tweaked the music, you've got everything kind of balanced and sounding good. Well, there's one additional step, right? And it's kind of like when you send out your picture for color, right? You do your sort of final color pass. Someone does that. Same concept here, your final audio pass. And with audio mastering, there's three basic concepts. And again, these are subject to taste a little bit. You can modify how much you do of any one of these three elements. But the three basic elements of mastering are effectively what you're trying to do with your mix is make it a little brighter, a little bit wider, and a little bit louder, okay? This is really in the traditional sense. So a bit brighter, just more clear, right? You want voices to really peek through, right? Especially for a trailer, you have to be able to hear and understand what's going on. A bit brighter, just to have a bit more crispness and presence. A bit wider, right? The bigger and wider your mix is for your trailer, the more punch you're really gonna feel when people are watching that, okay? And then louder. And this is really sort of the final step, right? We love dynamics, or some of us do. I do. Dynamics are great. But if things vary too much in volume, people kind of drift off. They lose interest. So regardless, though, you still want to take that final mix and just make it a little bit louder. Glue things together a bit more just to bring everything a bit more up front, right? So that things are just a little more consistent, all right? So brighter, wider, louder. And to do that, you're going to typically stack these things in an effects chain non-destructively. So let's go ahead and move over to Audition here, where I have this pre-mastered trailer mix. Now, another thing to keep in mind, I get asked this a lot, particularly on the YouTube, when you're going to master your final mix, all right, or if you're going to be delivering your final mix to someone to be mastered, what file format should it be in? And there is one answer to that: uncompressed audio. Do not send an MP3 of your final mix. Do not send an MP4 video, right? So you're going to YouTube, so you export an H.264, and you're like, oh, it's got the mix in there. You can just master it off of that. No, because that's compressed. You're throwing audio data away. So in the case of this particular one, this mix here is coming off of a ProRes 422 master, so it's uncompressed, 32-bit float, 48K audio. That's essential, okay? Because if you're compressing it in any way, you're already destroying and throwing away a whole bunch of elements that you could otherwise be treating and making better, okay? So key, first and foremost, when you're going to do your audio mix, source it from either, like an uncompressed wave, stereo wave, PCM wave. A lot of people still use AIF files, right? That's Apple's sort of Windows equivalent of the wave. AIF files are fine. People always ask, can I use an uncompressed FLAC or something like that? Sure, but yes, but in all of those formats are still technically they have lossless versions, but they're codecs that are trying to compress things down. If that's all you've got, great. And if all you have is MP3, you use what you have. But if you have the ability to get the best sounding master, the best sounding final mix before you finalize it and finish it off, get it uncompressed, get it as wave, okay? Senthil, you are a beginner of this application. Very good. What's up, Carrie? How are you doing? All right, Axe Grinder, Luxemania, Animador, David Teagleson. All right, nice to see you. Okay, so let's play back a little bit of this. So this is a short film by my friend Mike Burton. We've shown this a couple times on the stream. Mike is the man on the bike here. He was also the director and editor of this. And I believe, I don't even think it said it in the credits, I think he actually did the sound mix on this as well. So let's just take a look and we'll have a listen here. I'm actually going to grab my headphones so I can listen along with you. And listen to what the pre-mastered mix sounds like, all right? Here we go.
When you're young, you don't think about goals. Your dreams are your goals. Adventure is all around you. Waiting. All you need is a little bit of courage. But in the heat of the battle, your bravery can run and hide. Fear creeps in. And sometimes it all feels a little bit too much. But you keep going. Because you could do anything.
Sorry about that. Okay, so we'll just stop it right there because this is about 3 minutes. So again, the mix sounds good, and that's kind of the first thing that you need to be aware of before you begin the process of mastering, is that to really be effective in the mastering process, you want to have a decent mix. Now, of course, there's a school of thought, and this is something I continue to do and have done on many times, many occasions, which is kind of using the mastering process to fix problems in a final mix. And certainly that is one element of the mastering process. Mastering, in fact, if you think back to when CDs, not the initial pressings of CDs in sort of the early and mid 80s, but once you got into the mid 90s and early 2000s, when everything was being remastered, a lot of that was just taking these final masters from tape and then again, just trying to kind of improve upon some of the then limitations that people had when they mixed down their records in anticipation of pressing them on vinyl. That is part of it. But again, if you've got sort of a very troublesome mix, yes, you can use the mastering process to try and fix it, but ultimately, it really behooves you to go back to the masters, if at all possible, and make that mix a little bit better. In this case, today, we're really focusing on stereo. Now, 5.1 mastering is a little bit different, some different considerations there. We're largely focusing on stereo today. But again, if you've got problems, you really want to tackle the problems at the source, okay? So that's always something good to keep in mind. Just remember that. Okay. All right. Oh, did we lose sound for a minute? Sorry, I was messing about with some of the keys here. So, okay, apologies for that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start here right at the beginning of the track, and we're going to get into the effects rack. Now, if you don't see that, this is something that you can access through the window menu here up on effects rack. Okay, and I think inside of the default workspace, you'll also see the effects rack. I'm forgetting if it's there by default or not. This is where you want to be able to stack your effects in real time, okay? And then you apply them when you're finished at the end, right? So once we have everything in here, we'll be able to apply those effects. Now, again, in terms of brighter, wider, louder, as I said, it doesn't necessarily, in terms of adding effects in the chain, it doesn't have to fall necessarily in that order. That is kind of the basic ordering. But one of the first things that I will often do, based on how dynamic something is possibly add a little bit of just basic compression to the overall mix, just to kind of tighten things up and smooth out little peaks here and there that are just kind of larger than the average audio. So the first thing I'll do before I even do that is run what's called amplitude statistics. And I've done this and shown this a bunch of times. This is one of the best elements of Adobe Audition because it tells you everything you need to know about that particular audio file. So in this case, you're going to find it up here, Window, Amplitude Statistics. All right, go ahead and click Scan, like that. And this is going to tell you a whole bunch of things about your audio file. All right, first and foremost, the peak amplitude. So for a digital mix, without any compression applied to it yet, keeping this completely wide open, we are not peaking at 0, which is very good. We've got about 3.5 decibels of headroom, which is fine. No clipped samples. That's kind of essential to know here. Again, this is one of those problem things. A lot of times I actually get mixes from friends that they've done, and they mix right up to 0, which you should never do. And as a result, they have clipped samples. So again, that's one of those using mastering to fix and repair problems before you go out to distribution, before you publish to your end destination. And then you have all of these RMS values. Now, these values are need more coffee. These values are related to average loudness based on the dBFS scale, so decibels relative to full scale. These days, largely when we're talking about mastering audio, we're actually working kind of in a new measuring, a new type of measurement, which is instead of dBFS, it's LUFS, LUFS, which is also known as loudness units relative to full scale. We don't really concern ourselves too much with peak these days. It's just overall loudness. All right. So these total RMS stands for root mean squared, by the way. These are kind of traditional values here. And you can see that they're measured in dB, dBFS. The one we're really most concerned with when we deliver our final master is this, all right, LUFS. Now, if this were going to broadcast TV, and again, this is not even mastered yet, this is theoretically, as a final mix, a little hot for broadcast television. Broadcasters typically want, depending upon if you're in the EU, UK, here in the US, Canada, Japan, somewhere between -23 and -24 LUFS. So again, I would use mastering to even out some of those dynamics. Still, I can make things a little bit louder and glued together, but I would bring the overall average loudness down, right? Because we're about 2 decibels out of range here, okay? That's for television. The good news is, for most of us, we're not broadcasting to TV. And everywhere else, the standards are, well, there really aren't definitive standards. People just want to make stuff loud. And you know this because you have probably seen movie trailers, and no 2 movie trailers are created exactly the same in terms of the sound mix. But there is one common thread, which is they are ridiculously loud. And the same goes for music. If you listen to stuff, that you stream on Spotify or Apple Music, or if you're still listening to, downloads or MP3s or whatever, the music is mastered super loud and super hot, trying to take advantage of every piece of dynamic range, really or minimizing the dynamic range to really squeeze out as much punch as they possibly can. But the good news here is that we don't have any clipped samples. We still have headroom, and we can see that visually. We can see our bit depth of this mix, all right? And this is kind of our starting point. So we know that it's good, it's clean, we don't have to repair any digitally clipped artifacts, and we can kind of start fresh. So when I look at this, again, just right sort of off the top, I just have a couple of areas where there's just some momentary transient peaks that I would just kind of like to even out, all right? Just even things out a bit, and maybe just, again, smooth it out a little. You can actually see, if you zoom into the waveform, that there is a kind of noticeable crescendo, right? Now, this is a really amazing technique, right? This is, in fact, if we sort of preserved dynamics like we once did, this is what you want. The whole thing really comes to a very loud peak. Now, it can still do that. We just want the quieter parts to be louder when we start off these days, if that makes sense. Okay. All right. Anthony, when mastering music for, say, a band, would Audition be the program to use for mixing and creating a final product for distribution, or is another program needed before bringing it into Audition? No, you can absolutely mix and master in Audition. All of my masters available commercially on Spotify and everywhere else are done in Audition. Okay. All right. So let's see. So Tim is saying -14 for Tidal, Amazon, YouTube, and Spotify. Yeah. Now, again, that is not what you need to master to. And in fact, if you even download files from there, the files themselves are not mastered at -14. That's what their algorithm attempts in terms of trying to equalize the output volumes. That's what they're using. But the tracks themselves aren't mastered at -14. If you listen to a mix, of, let's say, Jay-Z, because I saw someone mention Jay-Z above, I would almost guarantee that that is probably somewhere between -8 and -5 LUFS. And you can verify this yourself pretty easily, especially if you rip things off a CD. So the masters that they're getting are freaking hot, super, super hot. On their end, for playback, for streaming, they can do things to, again, equalize the volume so you don't have those significant jumps. Having said that, go ahead and listen to a brand new mastered track, whatever, Lana Del Rey, something like that. And then I always think around the holidays, I love George Michael, love Wham, and their famous song "Last Christmas" from the mid-'80s. It's never been remastered, or maybe it has on some collection, but the one that I always seem to end up with in a playlist is like the original CD pressing from '85 or '86, and it just sounds like it's in another room. So we'll go from like Mariah Carey, right? All I Want for Christmas, recently just had the anniversary of that one, loud and just in your face and glorious. And then it gets to Last Christmas and it's so quiet. And then you wind up turning things up. So again, that's because that old track has never been remastered to sort of modern standards. All right. -99 Luftballons for Nina. Very good. All right. Yes. Very, very cool. Okay. All right, let's see if there's any more stuff here. Stephanie is editing and writing a TV script for Reboot TV Show. Ooh, very nice. All right. Okay, so let's start with the first effect in the chain here. So again, I'm going to use a little bit of compression just to kind of even out some of those dynamic peaks and also to bring out some of the additional low-end frequencies. Now again, I wouldn't typically be doing it in headphones, of course. I'm doing that for the purposes of the stream. And I'm going to use a combination of native and third-party effects. Now for compressors, we have lots of them. If you just wanted to do a standard, what we consider a single band, just stereo left and right compressor, we have the tube modeled compressor, which is one of my favorites. I like this one a lot. It is using a tube model emulation to sound more like classic tube compression. We also have the single band compressor. Now the main differences between these two, tube modeled has metering, single band does not. I never use this one. Quite frankly, we should just take this out of here. I don't know how you even bother using a compressor without metering. And this one, I don't know if it's using the same modeling algorithm or not. It might, but there's no metering on here, so I'm not a fan of this one at all. But you have single modeled, you have tube modeled, you have the dynamics processor, which is the classic Audition Cool Edit Pro compressor, limiter, expander, gate. Lots of presets in here, lots of ways to get started. A little confusing if you're not very familiar with it. There's also the dynamics effect, which is also a combination gate, compressor, limiter, expander. And then there's the multi-band compressor. Sheesh, why so many? Why so many choices? Well, because one, they all sound slightly different. Two, they all have slightly different features. And three, depending upon what you need to do, some of them offer more for sort of more individual tweaking of parameters. Some are a bit more automated. Some don't even have metering. It's just kind of like drag some sliders and listen. So lots of different flavors. They're all going to produce slightly different sounds. Now for a global stereo mix, one of my favorites it's a classic. It's been around for ages. I wouldn't use this necessarily for like EDM, but I would use it for this kind of a theatrical mix, is I like to use the SSL stereo compressor. So this was a compressor that was built into a lot of the classic SSL 4000J and G and E series consoles. It just sounds wonderful. It looks cool. This is exactly what it looked like. It used to sit at the upper right sort of corner, just below the master VU meters on an SSL. And when I was at Berkeley back in the day at college, I had a professor who used to say that in the 90s in particular, 80s and 90s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. This effect, this bus compressor, was known as the record maker. Sounds like something out of a 70s commercial, like the SSL console now with the record maker. You know, yeah. So if you're wanting to use again just a little bit of subtle compression, just to kind of even things out and just kind of glue things together and bring everything a little bit closer together, basic stereo compression is a good way to go. Sometimes people will equalize before this. Sometimes you EQ, then compress, then EQ again. All of these combinations are possible. For this, we're going to EQ afterwards. I'm actually going to use the compressor here to do a little bit of amplification to also reveal some things that maybe I need to boost and or cut. So there's, of course, lots of presets in here. This being a third-party effect, a lot of these are sort of pre-created. I believe it even has the preset, kind of the standard settings that people would have considered the record maker settings here, okay? And then there's a couple others that I happen to really like. You can see a lot of these engineers that they're kind of modeling after have their own variations of this. This particular one, Gil Norton, is very much the way that I use this master bus compressor, which consists of three basic elements. So first of all, a fairly fast attack. So a 1 millisecond attack, meaning that it's kicking in all the time based on your threshold, right? But it's kicking in all the time based on the threshold, meaning that only if those louder peaks exceed, but it's always ready to begin compressing. Super fast attack, okay? For release, this is one of the things about this particular effect that I like, and I'm not even sure if we have auto release in any of our native effects. I can't remember if we do or not. Normally, I would set this manually on a traditional compressor, but on this particular bus compressor, the auto release function it sounds very, very good. It's very musical. It's very natural. It's kind of what made it famous. So I actually like to use an auto release here. If I weren't using an auto release for, again, a general stereo 2-track subtle bus compression, I would probably use a pretty fast release. Okay, so maybe around right here, like 0.6, something like that, or 0.3 maybe. Okay, I'm going to use auto though in this case. And then for ratio, we're going to change this here 2:1. All right, I just want a little bit of subtle compression. I don't want to squeeze things down. I just want to even out the dynamics a little and bring everything a little bit closer, okay? And then we're going to adjust the threshold manually by listening, and then it's already got about a dB and a half of makeup gain. We'll adjust this accordingly to make sure that we're keeping the volume the same, whether the compressor is on or off, and then just add a little bit of additional boost. So let me go ahead and start playing this back. We'll start it from somewhere in the middle here, where I know we've got a bit more of these peaks. And let's take a listen.
All you need is a little bit of courage. But in the heat of the battle, your bravery can run and hide. The fear creeps in. And sometimes it all feels a little bit too much.
And the reason I keep turning this on or off, again, based on how you have the makeup gain set. When you compress things, right, even though we're just kind of catching subtle peaks, it's obviously making those a little bit quieter. So when I turn off the compressor and turn it back on, I'm trying to adjust that makeup gain so that the overall volume doesn't change. So this is meant to be sort of a seamless type of compression. You're not supposed to hear it get significantly louder. We're just trying to even things out, but still maintain the same overall volume. So this sounds pretty good. I'm going to keep this right where it is. And by the way, if I were to just apply this, if you take a look visually at the waveform here and kind of like note some of these louder peaks that are kind of, again, throwing off the overall dynamics. If I were to apply this now when you take a look at this, you can see that all of the peaks are basically the same, okay? It's not squeezed entirely. There's still breathing room, but overall you can see that even the higher peaks, and now it appears like, oh, there's more of them. Yeah, we've just evened out the loudest ones to kind of match the middle loudest ones, okay? So let's undo that so we can keep it non-destructive. And that's kind of the beauty of having this in the effects rack, is that nothing is destructive here, all right? Okay. Bob Demers, can I briefly explain the compressor terminology? Okay, yes, I can explain it. I don't want to spend too much time on that because compression, as you well know, is a very detailed thing, which I've covered multiple times here. But I'll do it one more time for this purposes, because this is really the essence of mastering, is using compression and limiting. All right, so any good compressor has these 5 basic parameters. And here I'm using our native tube modeled compressor, okay? So we have the threshold. The threshold is the point at which compression begins. Your audio must exceed whatever that threshold is in order for the compressor to start working. And that works directly in tandem with the ratio setting, okay? And the ratio you'll always see reflected as a fraction, right? 2:1, 3:1, 8:1, 20:1. And what that means is, in this case, 3:1, for every 3 decibels that your signal exceeds the threshold, it's 1 decibel at the output. So if your signal exceeds that threshold by 6 decibels, it's 2 dB at the output. If it exceeds it by 9 decibels, it's 3 dB at the output, and so on and so forth. So this is why, a lot of times I'll see people, and I've seen it on YouTube videos, which is why I've done so many tutorials on compression, where people are like, they'll choose a preset, for instance. Like you saw before, I chose that preset, but the threshold was set so low that it wasn't actually compressing anything. So if I just applied it, even though there was makeup gain, it would have gotten a little louder, but it wasn't compressing anything. It wasn't doing what the compressor is supposed to do. So you have to, and that's why you need to have metering, okay? So if I can actually just show it to you here real briefly. All right, we'll just use this as a little test here, okay? So let's start setting the threshold. So again, 3 to 1. So what that means is I need to see, this is called your gain reduction meter here on the right. This is your input meter on the left. I need to see this 3 dB decibel light illuminate to know that I'm even doing anything, okay? If I'm not hitting at least 3 decibels on that gain reduction meter, nothing is happening, okay?
Waiting.
Okay, so right now, I'm maintaining about -6, okay? So that means I'm 6 decibels above the threshold, right? So it's only giving us 2 decibels. So it's basically squeezing it down 4, we're getting 2 at the output, okay? If I did this,
all you need is a little bit of courage.
threshold -12. Now it's louder, right? Here it's not on. Here it's off. It's on again.
But in the heat of the battle,
it's louder, but we haven't done anything. We haven't compressed anything. It's never exceeding that threshold. Okay, maybe it would by the time we get to here, although I doubt it because this threshold is just set improperly. So this is a common mistake that people make. They'll choose like a preset. You always have to readjust the threshold based on your audio content. Always, 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 period, always. Don't forget that. That's not to say that you couldn't stumble on a preset and it just sort of works. You're like, oh yeah, look, it's compressing. More often than not, you'll choose a preset and it's compressing too much. So then to minimize that, you back off on the threshold, okay? So that's what ratio is. Output gain, we already kind of explained that. After it squeezes things down, you bring the basic audio back up. Attack is how fast the compressor kicks in after it exceeds the threshold. And then release is after it's compressed it down, how long it takes for that audio to recover to where it was. In this case, 100 milliseconds or 1/10 of a second. All right? Yes. All right. Thank you, Sean. Totally. Okay. All right. So there's your little compression tutorial very, very quickly. All right. So now we have things compressed. Now what I want to do is come in here and work on equalization. All right. Now, once again, EQs, it's not uncommon to have 2 or more stages of equalization in an effects chain. Because again, we kind of compress it right now, just compression to even things out a little. We're now going to add a little EQ to kind of brighten things up. Maybe accentuate or warm up some of the bottom end. Maybe then we'll widen a little bit. Maybe then we'll limit, and then maybe we'll do some post-limiting EQ, or maybe we'll do another EQ before the limiter, all right? It's a lot of individual tweaking. And that's why with mastering in general, there's no absolute, all right? It really depends on, first of all, how good the original recording is, right? If the original recording is really good, you don't have to do all that much. Subtle EQ to brighten it, subtle stereo widening, but be careful. And then, you know, intense brick wall limiting just to make it really punch you in the face, metaphorically speaking, of course. All right. You're very welcome, Bob. Okay, so let's go into EQ. Now, again, and maybe I'll showcase this to you here just so you can kind of hear for yourself. Equalizers, all different sounds. This is why when you see, you know, recording studios, not unlike my own here, although you can't see the gear along the side here, lots of different EQs because they all have different sonic qualities to them. You know, not just whether they're transistor or tube based, but just in, you know, some equalizers have fixed bandwidths, right? So they've kind of, the engineers have dialed in, this is the best sounding mid EQ. So you can't adjust how wide of a band you're affecting. It's only just gain up or down, and you kind of sweep the frequency that you want. Others offer fully parametric. You can adjust bandwidth. You can adjust all of these various elements. Some, like a graphic, the widths are fixed, and then you have just individual frequencies that you can dial in. Again, those have a different sound. They're all different. This is why there are so many out there. This is why so many people use different ones. And in the mastering process, sometimes you'll use one EQ just to handle the top end, the high end, the brightness, the clarity. And then maybe at the end of your chain, you'll use another just to very carefully modify or tweak bass frequencies. Okay? All right. So one of the ones that, again, our native one that I like, it's very just sort of transparent. I don't even say that it has a sound per se, although it theoretically does, but it's more that it's just kind of clean. Not clinical, but just clean. And I would say musical in a very nice kind of way is our parametric EQ. Now you have, of course, the same one in Premiere Pro as well. So it offers 5 fully parametric bands, meaning that you have sweepable frequency, gain, booster, cut, and then your frequency bandwidth, your Q value, is fully adjustable. And of course, you can enable or disable each of these bands as well. You also have what's known as high and low shelving filters. So again, shelving relates to this type of curve, and it's how you sort of handle the low end frequency, or in some cases subsonic frequencies. Again, based on how you adjust the curve, you can have it a bit more harsh, a bit more linear in terms of boost or cut, or a smoother, kind of slightly more sinusoidal curve here. High and low shelving filters. Again, if you just want to bring up a little, high-end shimmer around 16K or something, this one sounds pretty good. And then this one also has high pass and low pass filtering. So this one allows you, in the case of high pass, I mentioned this 2 weeks ago on the stream, high pass means low cut. It allows frequencies above a certain frequency range to pass through while cutting all of the low frequencies. And you can see it's doing that here. So effectively, with a high pass enabled at 38 hertz, it's cutting off everything below 38 hertz at 24 decibels per octave. By the way, you also have additional curves here. So the more dB per octave, the steeper the curve. So if I did 48 decibels per octave, watch what happens to that. Watch what happens to this right here. You're going to see it's going to get infinitely more, or well, twice as steep, right? So it's a much sharper cut. All right. Now this is subsonic anyway. You don't hear 38. You feel 38. All right. I mean, I suppose you could sort of hear it, but not really. Again, typically for like, if you've got troublesome rumble in your track, this is where, it's not uncommon to see something like that. Roll off everything below 38. It's still letting some of it pass through, but those real troublesome things, you don't want your subwoofer like vibrating for 2 hours, right? So this is a way to get rid of that. This is also used a lot in like electronic music. And then you have the low pass filter, right? Low pass, high cut, right? So the low pass filter is the opposite. It's cutting off all high frequencies above a particular frequency range. So in this case, everything above 16.5 K, 16,500 hertz, is being cut at 24 decibels per octave. And if we slid this down, you can kind of see what that's doing as well, okay? Now for mastering a final mix, again, probably not going to use a lot of low pass filtering. You might use some high pass filtering. Again, if you have like really troublesome, problematic subsonics in there. But this is where, as the engineer, if it were possible, I would say to the mix engineer, hey, go back and like, can you fix that? I don't want to have to roll off, because there might be some subsonics that you want periodically. And if we kind of kill them here, you'll have the essence of some of them, but maybe this is something you need to fix. Or they might say, no, that's how we want it. That's part of the soundtrack. There's supposed to be this uneasy rumble for, if it's a short, especially for 10 minutes. And I actually produced something like that once before, which was pretty cool. Okay. So typically I'll start with something like a full reset, okay? And what you're trying to do here is identify what is it that needs improvement, right? Now remember, I said brighter. So the voices sound pretty good. We can probably elevate them a little more, bring out a little bit of that mid-range and maybe upper mids. The key thing in a trailer, of course, is hearing that dialogue. The dialogue really needs to peek through. So we might identify a little bit of that. And then again, maybe just identify some of the lower mids that might need just a little subtle boosting. So I'm going to take a listen here and we'll start tweaking that as well. All right, here we go. And Steve is saying, why didn't you finish the mix? I got punched in the face so many times I needed a break. Very nice. Bob, what about preserving the harmonics of subsonics? Yeah, now again, if you're talking about low harmonics, I mean, 20 hertz and all that, I mean, that stuff is truly, it just depends on the content, right? I mean, again, if you've got something at 20 hertz that's rumbling for the duration of your audio and it's not supposed to be, that's problematic. So a high pass could certainly knock that out, but then it's gone entirely. There might be a moment where you want some 20 hertz subsonics. So this is where, again, knowing that the original mix engineer did the right thing is kind of key to knowing what you as the mastering engineer need to do to kind of preserve the mix and bring out everything that's supposed to be there. dB stands for decibels. If you roll off low end, do you still get harmonics? Well, yes. I mean, again, this isn't, you saw, it's not a completely sharp cutoff. Now, if you wanted a complete sharp cutoff, you could use our FFT filter. This is still a bit of a sinusoidal roll-off. You will theoretically get some harmonics, okay? But the harmonics of subsonics are not significant in that, again, if you're trying to use them for low-frequency effect, they're not meant to be extremely sustained unless it's a scene where you have like, rumble, in which case you want to preserve them and be a bit more careful, okay? It really just depends on the content, okay? But yes, if you're doing a super harsh cut with our FFT in here, by the way, since you're asking, Bob, you got a lot of questions here, happy to answer them because that's what this is all about. I'll show you the difference. This is an FFT filter, and this is, again, a sharp linear cut. So if I want to just kill everything at 100 hertz, I could do that, and it's just gone. And if you use the frequency analysis tool here, I'm going to turn off our parametric for a second. All right, if I play this back now.
Your bravery can run and hide.
Okay. Now again, visually it's a little deceptive here. But this is with it off.
And sometimes it all feels a little bit too much.
Okay. So sonically, this is very, very sharp. All right. That's why I say before, like the parametric it's just more musical. Now, by the way, you can turn this into a spline. Not quite like that, of course, but so that it's, again, less harsh and has a bit more of that smoother roll-off characteristic. All right, something like this.
But you keep going.
And if you're listening, what that tells you is there's a whole bunch of low end in here. Now, you might have thought when I took it out, oh, it sounds pretty good. But when I brought it back in, it's like, well, no, but there's like ocean and there is rumble. There's tires on the ground. You want to hear some of that low end. So again, that's why sonically, these all have different sounds. I would never use 100 hertz linear cutoff like that. It just sounds harsh to me. It sounds like something's missing, all right? And that's the difference, and that's why there's so many different flavors of EQ, okay? All right, so let's keep on going here. We're gonna add a little bit of brightness and a little bit of presence here.
But in the heat of the battle, your bravery can run and hide. Fear creeps in. And sometimes it all feels a little bit too much. But you keep going. Because you could do anything. And when you conquer your fear, the whole world is yours. So stay brave. Even if it means letting go. dreaming, and always be on.
All right, so I'm going to start with it off, and then I'll kick it in for just a moment. All right, here we go.
And sometimes it all feels a little bit too much. But you keep going. Because you could do anything. And when you conquer your fear.
Okay. Now again, this is fairly subtle. This is why good listening environments are important. Mastering is all about subtlety. But if you were listening and you're on a decent system, you could probably hear that it sounded wider because we were sort of lifting a bit of that slightly muffled haze that was happening in the strings. You could almost hear or perceive the bowing of the strings there. All right. And the voice just got really just present, and it just really kind of sat right in the middle there. All right, so a little bit of EQ. Notice I didn't do too much cutting. I cut a little bit around 245 hertz, and I adjusted this against this 98 hertz here. It's getting a little bit of a standing wave warble at around 200 something. You can even see it looks about here probably 350-ish. So again, between like 175, 350, there might be a little bit of an accentuation there. I kind of went somewhere in the midpoint and just cut about 1.5 dB, okay? Just to, again, kind of make it a little bit brighter, a little bit more present, all right? Okay, we've got 8 more minutes here. So much going on there, Steve. Yes, and that's why trailers are a great example for this, because you have music, you have dialogue, you have sound effects, you have all this other stuff going on. So it's even more challenging typically than often working with just a music soundtrack, although those can be, of course, also very challenging. All right. Now, I'm not typically one to use a lot of stereo widening. I like to personally do that in the mix itself. Again, that's just me being a mix engineer as well as a mastering person. But occasionally I will do that. Now, there's lots of third-party effects out there that do it. We have 2 here in Audition and Premiere that you can use. The first, which I think is in stereo imagery, is the stereo expander here. So it's very, very simple. And again, if we just apply this real quickly, you can see that you have a center channel pan. So a lot of times what will happen is when you do stereo expansion, and this is why you need to be really careful, you'll create what's known as kind of a phantom center, where as you widen the left and right, sometimes the center will start to attenuate and disappear. So in lieu of, before doing anything, this allows you to kind of readjust the center image a little bit with that top slider, which is sometimes necessary. Sometimes you can also use this to maybe pull elements from the left to right more towards center, okay? And then the single slider for stereo expansion basically goes from very mono sounding to very, very wide. Now, the thing you need to be careful about here is if in a stereo environment, this is never really so much of an issue. But if this is ever going to have any kind of mono playback, stereo expanding too much can destroy a mono playback, meaning particularly with dialogue, which is in the center, you could lose it, and you're going to lose some of the intelligibility. So you just need to be really careful. So there's this stereo expander effect. There is also, if we go under special, mastering, okay? Now, in mastering here, we also have a widener, which is just a single slider. You'll also notice that there's a 3-band parametric EQ. There's reverb in here. Exciter, which is a classic effect typically used to brighten and restore lost frequencies from tape recordings. And again, you think, why would I need that in the digital domain? You don't, but it kind of has a neat sound and can, again, provide a kind of airy lift. If you have kind of just a muddy track and you just want to brighten it up somehow, but brighten it as if it were like frequencies that have been lost in the mix, Exciter can sometimes do that. Stereo widening, loudness maximizing, I don't use it here, and then output gain, we won't touch that. The only element that I really like in here is the widener, okay? And again, subtlety goes a long way. So as I play this back, I'm going to start adjusting that slider, and you're just going to hear that things are going to start to feel like they're opening up, and then I'll turn it on or off. I'll go a little bit more extreme so it's a bit more obvious, and then kind of you'll take a listen. All right, here we go.
And sometimes it all feels a little bit too much.
Okay, let's turn it off. And turn it on.
But you keep going.
Off. On.
Because you could do anything.
All right. Now, again, I'm not a huge fan of putting a lot of ambience or reverb, but for trailers, I talked about this on stream before, not uncommon. Not uncommon at all. You don't want to use a lot, because this is what a lot sounds like.
And when you conquer your fear.
You don't want that. You don't want like an echoey center voice. But a little bit will just provide a little bit of depth and space. And again, if this was delivered like in a nice sound setting or a theater, it actually makes it sound even more present. So sub 20% of this reverb effect, you don't have any adjustments for decay or duration. It's meant to be an ambient room type reverb. Can add just a little bit more presence.
The whole world is yours.
Okay, now again, I'm not a huge fan of the exciter, but I just want to let you hear what this slider sounds like, and you'll feel it in the strings in particular, that it just adds this airy crispness, which can be sometimes harsh, but sometimes nice. Take a quick listen.
So stay brave. Even if it means letting go.
You can really, it's like this airy, right? Because that's effectively trying to recreate frequencies that were lost, embedded in tape hiss, because you've just been playing back the tape over and over again. Never use this at 100% unless you're going for effect. This one can be very destructive. But again, sometimes it's just nice to add a little bit of a lift, and maybe we'll even do, just for the heck of it, like 6%, okay? And then the last thing that I'll show you today, because we've only got 3.5 more minutes, is to have a brick wall limiter or a finalizer, or something that's just going to allow you to push everything globally and make everything a little bit louder. Now you can use multi-band limiters, you can use a single band limiter. There's all different types of variations here. Just to keep it native, we have our multi-band compressor. Now, typically I would say to use something like the broadcast preset, but I don't want to recompress these bands here. So I can bypass all of these. And then I can simply just make sure that my brick wall limiter is enabled. And then I set my margin, which is my digital ceiling. What's the absolute maximum loudness that I want this to go? For, again, video masters, typically you want this somewhere around -6. Would be pretty standard. And this, I think this one actually only goes to -5. Yeah, it does. And then you adjust that threshold to add loudness. All right. So we can just listen to this one real quickly for a second here. And I'll just adjust that threshold and you'll hear what it's doing.
But in the heat of the battle, your bravery can run and hide. The fear creeps in.
So let's kill it.
And sometimes it all feels a little bit too much. But you keep going.
Okay, again, doing a little more extreme on here just so you can kind of hear what it's doing globally, noticeably, kind of gluing everything together and making it louder. That's the multi-band. Now, for video mixes, I don't love the sound of this one. It sounds it's got a little bit of a harshness to it to me. So one of my favorite third-party ones, there are many, but one of them is the L2 stereo, which I use a lot for music, or this one here, the L3 ultra stereo. And what's nice is this has a lot of, again, this emulates a lot of different classic style compressor limiters. This wideband arc setting is very common in classic analog processors. It's just very warm. You can also adjust the shaping here. Ultra is going to really zero in on specific frequencies, particularly low end, and preserve them. As you adjust shaping from ultra to normal to moderate, the low end gets a bit looser Ultra, super tight. Think of this like a bandwidth control, how it's shaping frequencies in this limiting process, okay? Ultra for something like this is really good. Again, we'll do a ceiling. Let's actually do around -5.5 and then adjust the threshold. Here we go. All right, and now everything before and after.
And when you conquer your fear.
All right, and unfortunately now we are out of time. So everybody, thank you so much for joining. You'll be able to watch the replay here on Behance, YouTube, and on my YouTube channel. Until next time, have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. We've got the Illustrator Daily Creative Challenge coming up next, so stick around with Andrew for that. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.